There is a quiet assumption many people carry without ever quite stating it out loud. The idea that truth is something like a lost object. That if you look carefully enough, with the right intensity, you will eventually find it waiting for you. As if truth were hiding behind a curtain, and the only reason it hasn't appeared yet is because you haven't searched hard enough. This assumption feels reasonable. After all, that's how we find most things in the world. You lose your keys, you retrace your steps. You don't know an answer, you investigate. You don't understand yourself, you analyze, you reflect, you dig. And so the search begins with sincerity, with effort, with concentration, with a tightening of attention. You look directly at the question and say, I want to know what is real. And yet, oddly enough, this is often the moment when truth seems to slip further away. Not because it is cruel or evasive, but because something subtle has already changed in the act of seeking. Consider, for a moment, something very ordinary: trying to fall asleep. The more you want sleep to happen, the more alert you become. You monitor your breathing. You notice every sound. You check whether sleep is arriving yet. And suddenly, the very thing you were hoping would occur naturally has become impossible. Sleep has not gone anywhere. It has not rejected you. But your effort to grasp it has turned it into a problem to be solved rather than a process that unfolds. Truth behaves in a strangely similar way. When you seek truth, you usually imagine yourself as a separate entity, standing outside reality, looking in. There is you, and there is truth, and the task is to close the distance between the two. But this very framing quietly assumes that truth is something other than what is already happening. Something hidden behind appearances. Something that must be uncovered by force of clarity or intelligence or persistence. And yet, if you watch closely, truth does not seem to operate like a hidden object at all. It behaves more like balance, or like silence, or like the awareness of a sound that was already there before you started listening for it. Take, for example, the experience of watching water in a clear stream. If you stand still, the water moves effortlessly. You can see stones beneath the surface, reflections of trees above it, ripples forming and dissolving without effort. But the moment you step in and try to grab the current, the water clouds. The movement becomes chaotic. What was transparent becomes distorted, not because the water has changed its nature, but because your intervention has altered the conditions. The search for truth often creates this same disturbance. The moment you decide, I must see reality clearly, a subtle tension arises. Attention narrows. Experience becomes something to be inspected rather than lived. Thought takes the role of an inspector, measuring each moment, asking whether this feeling is authentic, whether that belief is correct, whether this perception can be trusted. And while this inspection feels intelligent, it also introduces a division. There is now the observer and the observed, the seeker and the sought. This division feels small at first, almost harmless, but it hardens quickly. Identity begins to form around the role of the one who is seeking, the one who is trying to figure things out, the one who is not yet there. And as soon as identity attaches itself to the search, truth quietly recedes, not because it has moved, but because it no longer fits the shape of what is being sought. Truth, when approached this way, becomes an answer, a conclusion, a final clarity that will resolve uncertainty once and for all. And yet lived reality has never behaved like that. Life does not present itself as a solved equation. It presents itself as movement, contradiction, ambiguity, rhythm. The demand for a final, static truth is already out of alignment with the nature of experience itself. Notice how this plays out in everyday life. When someone asks, "Who am I really?" the question often carries the assumption that there is a single, stable answer waiting to be discovered. A core self hiding beneath behavior, roles, moods, and history. But the harder one looks for this fixed identity, the more elusive it becomes. Because identity, like truth, is not a thing. It is a process. a pattern appearing over time, a movement that cannot be pinned down without losing its vitality. The mind, however, is deeply uncomfortable with this. It prefers certainty. It prefers something it can hold, label, and rely upon. And so it tightens its grip. It searches harder. It refines its questions. It becomes more serious, more disciplined, more intent. And in doing so, it increases the very tension that makes clarity impossible. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a misunderstanding of relationship. Truth is not something you approach from a distance. It is something you are already immersed in. The difficulty is that immersion does not feel like knowing. It feels ordinary, too ordinary to trust, too immediate to be impressive, too close to be recognized as something profound. And so the search continues, circling around something that was never absent, only overlooked. When you seek truth, you are often seeking relief from confusion, relief from doubt, relief from the discomfort of not knowing. But the act of seeking subtly reinforces the idea that the present moment is insufficient, that what is happening now is not quite right, that reality must justify itself before it can be accepted. And this is where truth begins to disappear, not because it leaves, but because it no longer matches the shape of your demand. It is still here, moving quietly, like water beneath a reflection. But the more urgently you try to grasp it, the more distorted it appears. There is another assumption quietly embedded beneath the search, one that rarely comes into awareness. The idea that truth must feel different from ordinary experience, that when it appears, it will announce itself with certainty, clarity, perhaps even a sense of relief, that it will stand out from the background of daily life as something unmistakably important. And so, when experience feels mundane, repetitive, or unresolved, it is quickly dismissed as not yet the thing we are looking for. But this expectation already bends perception in a particular direction. Think about how the eyes work in low light. When you stare directly at a faint star, it often disappears. But when you relax your gaze and look slightly to the side, the star becomes visible again. It was never gone. The act of direct fixation simply overwhelmed the delicate sensitivity required to perceive it. The eyes, in this case, see more by not looking so hard. The search for truth tends to do the opposite. It fixes its gaze. It sharpens focus. It demands definition. And in doing so, it overwhelms the very subtlety it hopes to perceive. What makes this especially difficult is that seeking feels virtuous. It feels honest. It feels like caring deeply about reality. And in many areas of life, effort truly does produce results. You practice a skill, you improve. You study a subject, you gain knowledge. You apply pressure, something moves. So it feels only natural to apply the same logic inward, toward understanding existence, meaning, or oneself. But inward clarity does not respond to pressure in the same way. The moment effort enters, it brings with it a timeline, a sense of before and after. I am confused now, but later I will be clear. I am ignorant now, but soon I will know. And this temporal structure subtly reframes the present moment as a problem state. Something incomplete, something lacking. From there, perception becomes future-oriented. Experience is no longer something unfolding. It is something to be evaluated based on whether it brings you closer to an imagined endpoint. Thoughts are judged by whether they feel insightful enough. Emotions are measured by whether they seem aligned or misaligned. Even silence becomes suspicious. Is this the silence? Or just another distraction? And so attention is no longer open. It becomes strategic. This is where identity quietly tightens its grip. The seeker begins to take shape as a role, someone who is trying to understand, someone who is not yet satisfied, someone who is moving towards something more real than this. And once this role solidifies, every experience is filtered through it. Moments are no longer simply moments. They are steps, indicators, obstacles, or regressions. But truth does not arrive as a milestone. Truth does not announce progress. It does not confirm that you are getting warmer. It does not reward seriousness with revelation. In fact, seriousness is often the very thing that obscures it. Not because seriousness is wrong, but because it collapses curiosity into control. Control wants certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants stable ground. And so it seeks frameworks, explanations, conclusions that can be held onto. But lived reality remains fluid. It shifts depending on mood, context, memory, relationship, time of day. What felt obvious yesterday feels questionable today. What felt heavy once feels light later. What felt meaningful dissolves, only to return in a different form. This fluidity is deeply unsettling to the part of the mind that wants to know where it stands. And so the mind responds by tightening definitions, by solidifying beliefs, by anchoring identity to particular insights or understandings. This is who I am. This is what I've realized. This is what I know now. These statements provide a sense of ground, but they also freeze perception at a particular moment in time. When truth is approached this way, it becomes something to be possessed. And anything that can be possessed can also be lost. This is often where frustration enters. Someone may feel they once touched something real, a moment of clarity, a sense of openness, a feeling of alignment, and then it faded. The mind asks, what did I do wrong? How do I get it back? Why can't I stay there? And the search resumes with renewed intensity, driven by nostalgia for an experience that is now treated as a standard to be regained. But this longing is itself another layer of separation. Because truth is not an experience you revisit. It is not a state you maintain. It is not a realization you hold steady against the flow of life. It is closer to the flow itself. And the attempt to step outside that flow in order to secure it is precisely what creates the sense that it has disappeared. Notice how this pattern shows up in conversation. When someone is fully present, listening without agenda, understanding seems to happen effortlessly. Words land. Meaning emerges between people. But the moment one person starts trying to be understood, starts planning responses, starts steering the exchange toward a desired outcome, something stiffens. The conversation becomes mechanical. The connection thins. Nothing external has changed. The same people are there. The same words are spoken, but the quality of attention has shifted from participation to management. The search for truth often turns life into something to be managed. And life, when managed too tightly, loses its immediacy. This is not a moral failure. It is not a mistake to be corrected. It is simply the natural consequence of confusing openness with effort and presence with control. Truth does not hide from you, but it does not respond to pursuit in the way objects do. The more you try to corner it, the more it slips into the background of ordinary experience, where it has always been quietly operating. It does not disappear. It becomes too close to see. There is a subtle irony in all of this. The more seriously one seeks truth, the more the world begins to feel unreal, as if everything has become slightly hollow, slightly distant, slightly staged. People go to work, conversations happen, time passes, yet there is a lingering sense that something essential is missing. That life is being lived at arm's length. And the mind interprets this as confirmation. Yes, exactly. This is why I must keep searching. This can't be it. But what if this sense of unreality is not evidence that truth is absent, but evidence that attention has drifted away from direct experience and into commentary about it? When perception is filtered through constant evaluation, life becomes an object, something observed rather than inhabited. You begin to notice yourself noticing. You hear your thoughts about what is happening instead of what is happening. And while this reflective capacity is remarkable, it also introduces a kind of echo. Experience no longer arrives cleanly. It arrives with a delay, accompanied by interpretation. This echo is often mistaken for depth. Thinking about reality feels deeper than simply being in it. Analyzing emotion feels more meaningful than feeling it. Questioning identity feels more profound than playing a role without commentary. And yet, depth that relies on distance is a strange kind of depth. It moves downward by stepping back, by abstracting, by turning immediacy into concept. Truth does not live in abstraction. Abstraction is useful, necessary even, but when it becomes the primary mode of engagement, it begins to replace contact with commentary. Life becomes something you stand above rather than move within, and from that elevated position, everything starts to look thin. This is often where anxiety quietly enters the picture. Anxiety is not simply fear. It is the tension that arises when the mind tries to secure what cannot be stabilized, when it tries to hold experience still long enough to make sense of it, when it tries to define itself in a world that refuses to stop changing. The more the mind insists on clarity, the more sensitive it becomes to ambiguity. The more it demands certainty, the more threatening uncertainty feels. And uncertainty is everywhere. Every relationship shifts. Every understanding evolves. Every mood passes. Even the sense of self fluctuates from moment to moment. Yet the seeker, having committed to the search for truth, often interprets this fluidity as a problem rather than a feature, as noise rather than signal, as distraction rather than expression. So effort increases, attention tightens, thought circles back on itself, trying to catch what keeps moving, and the result is not clarity but exhaustion, a quiet fatigue that comes from trying to pin down something that was never meant to be pinned. At this point, many people begin to suspect that truth must exist somewhere else, outside ordinary life, outside routine, work, small talk, repetition, somewhere cleaner, higher, more refined. And so the everyday world becomes a kind of waiting room, a place you pass through while preparing for something more real. But notice what this does. It splits life in two. There is the meaningful search, and there is the mundane background. There is the serious inner journey, and there is the trivial outer world. And once this split takes hold, presence becomes selective. You are only fully attentive when something feels relevant to the search. The rest of life is endured rather than lived. Truth, when framed this way, becomes fragile. It depends on conditions, on silence, on insight, on special moments, and the moment those conditions disappear, truth seems to vanish with them. You are back in traffic, back in emails, back in habits and responsibilities, back in the same old patterns. And the mind concludes, I've lost it again. But what if nothing was lost? What if the feeling of loss comes from the assumption that truth must be separate from these moments in order to count? The sound of a keyboard, the waiting in line, the irritation at a delay, the boredom of repetition. These are not obstacles to truth. They are expressions of reality unfolding in a particular form, but they do not flatter the searcher's expectations. They do not feel elevated or insightful, and so they are dismissed as irrelevant. Yet reality does not curate itself around what feels meaningful. It includes the trivial, the awkward, the unresolved, the unfinished. And when attention rejects these aspects in favor of something more refined, perception becomes selective. You begin to see only what fits your idea of truth. Everything else fades into the background, labeled as distraction. Ironically, this filtering is what creates the sense that truth is disappearing. Because truth, unlike an idea, does not exclude. It does not select. It does not wait for the right mood or context. It does not require you to step outside life in order to encounter it. It is present in the tension, in the confusion, in the lack of clarity, just as much as in moments of insight. But insight is dramatic, confusion is ordinary, and the search, trained to recognize the dramatic, overlooks the ordinary entirely. This is why truth feels so elusive when pursued, not because it is hidden behind complexity, but because it is woven into simplicity so thoroughly that it fails to register as something special. And the seeker, conditioned to look for something exceptional, walks past it again and again, convinced that it must be somewhere else. The more life is treated as a means to an end, the less it feels like reality itself. And so truth does not vanish. It becomes background noise to a mind that is listening only for answers. There comes a point, often unnoticed, when the search grows quiet not because it has succeeded, but because it has grown tired. The mind has turned the question over so many times that it begins to lose its sharp edges, not out of resolution, but out of repetition. And in that tiredness, something softens. The urgency loosens its grip. The question is still there, but it no longer demands an answer in the same way. This moment is easy to misunderstand. It can feel like resignation, like giving up, like settling for less than clarity. And so it is often resisted. The mind tells itself that it must not stop now, that stopping would mean failure, complacency, or self-deception. But this pause is not indifference. It is not apathy. It is simply the absence of strain. And in the absence of strain, perception behaves differently. Without the constant pressure to extract meaning, experience begins to arrive without commentary. Not all at once, not dramatically, just in small, unremarkable ways. The weight of a body sitting in a chair, the sound of distant movement, the rhythm of breath happening without instruction. None of this announces itself as truth. None of it claims significance, and yet it is undeniably real. What has changed is not reality, but the relationship to it. When seeking relaxes, even briefly, the division between observer and observed thins, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer emphasized. Attention is no longer pointed like a finger. It becomes more like a field, inclusive rather than selective, present without trying to hold what appears. In this state, truth does not appear as an object of knowledge. It appears as familiarity, as something so intimate it no longer needs to be identified. And because it lacks novelty, it does not feel like discovery. It feels like recognition without a label. This is why truth cannot be held. The moment it is named, the moment it is framed as something you now have, the moment it becomes part of identity, it turns back into an idea, something remembered rather than lived, something referred to rather than inhabited. And the search begins again, not because truth has left, but because the mind has replaced immediacy with memory. This cycle repeats endlessly. Seeking creates tension. Tension creates distance. Distance creates longing. Longing fuels more seeking. And all the while, life continues to happen in the background, quietly, patiently, without waiting for the question to be resolved. Time passes. People age. Relationships change. Moods rise and fall. The body moves through space. None of this pauses for insight. None of it requires understanding to proceed. And yet, it is precisely this ongoing movement that is so often excluded from the idea of truth. Truth, when imagined as something stable and final, cannot survive contact with time, because time reveals that everything shifts, that no perception remains fixed, that even the sense of being the one who is seeking is itself a passing pattern. And when this is noticed not as a conclusion, but as a simple observation, the seriousness of the search begins to loosen. Not because the question has been answered, but because the question no longer stands apart from life. At this point, truth does not feel like something that disappears when you seek it. It feels like something that was never meant to be sought in the first place. Not because seeking is wrong, but because seeking assumes separation. It assumes absence. It assumes that reality must be approached from somewhere else, and there is nowhere else to stand. The irony is that the more ordinary life becomes, the less reason there is to doubt it. When moments are no longer evaluated for significance, they no longer need to justify themselves. They simply occur. And in that occurring, without commentary, without demand, without expectation, there is a quiet coherence that does not need to be named. This coherence is not a message. It does not say anything. It does not promise understanding. It does not resolve confusion. It does not even call attention to itself. It simply continues. And perhaps this is why truth seems to disappear when you seek it, because seeking asks it to stand still, to be something you can look at, hold on to, or carry forward. But truth, if it can be spoken of at all, is not an object in experience. It is the movement of experience